So welcome to our second week of Sustainability, the Career Conversations, new look at sustainability. Today we're joined by Dr. Christopher Shank, who is the Executive Director of the Bald Head Island Conservancy. He studied electrical engineering in undergrad and also received an MS and a PhD in marine sciences from UNC Chapel Hill. And he has experience working at the UNCW Center for Marine Sciences, and as we were just talking about, has taught some classes here at UNCW as well as at other universities. And we're super excited to have you here. So thank you, and thank you to all the guests who are joining us today as well.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, Annie and Maiya.
And today's guest is Dr. Shank from the Bald Head Island Conservancy. So I know Annie gave a brief introduction to you and your career, but can you just go a little bit into detail about what your journey in sustainability has looked like? Maybe like how you got to your current career?
Man, we only got an hour, so all right. It goes back a long way. I'll be honest, that word didn't even exist when I was in college. I didn't, nobody talked about that. I was an engineer, mostly because I knew I could get a good job. And I was working in Research Triangle Park after I finished undergrad and before the internet, and I was just flipping through the graduate catalog at Chapel Hill. I was living in Chapel Hill, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I flipped through the pages, and the marine science opened up. I'm like, wait a second, I flipped back. Like, marine science, that's a career? Because it was my hobby. I never thought about it as a career. I just always loved the water, spent a lot of time in the ocean doing a lot of different things. And so I started that. I left engineering and went into marine science, and I never looked back. That was, I can't believe it's been 30 years ago. And I loved every minute of it. I just wanted to learn. When I was an undergrad, I was not the best student in the class. I was smart enough to know where the line was so I didn't ruin my whole life by stepping over that line. My grades weren't that great, but I just wasn't focused. But when I went back to school for marine science, man, I wanted to learn everything. It was amazing the difference that it was amazing how much more I wanted to learn as a graduate student. And so I got into marine science, never looked back. And I've just, because I've been doing it so long, I've learned so much about coastal environments. It was always a hobby, right? I mean, I had a sense of how the coast worked, but I didn't know the science behind it. So I went back to school and learned how the oceans work, learned how the coastlines work, learned about the dynamics of barrier islands. So after I finished my master's degree through Chapel Hill, I worked at UNCW for the Center for Marine Science Research back then on the Cape Fear River program, which is still going on. Mike Mallon is still at CMS, and Matt McKeever, who's the research tech with him, is the guy that I started with on that project in 1995, which is cool. It's still going on. Then I did my PhD work. Although my PhD is Chapel Hill, I still did it through UNCW, which is pretty cool. Chapel Hill faculty let me stay in Wilmington. My daughter had just been born, and I didn't need to take any classes, so I stayed and worked through the chemistry department at UNCW and did all my PhD work through them. And I did it on the Cape Fear, which is what I've been working on with the Cape Fear River program, which is cool. And then I ended up in Texas, which is I never expected to go to Texas, and being a professor at the University of Texas for 10 years in marine science. That was really cool. I mean, I loved, there's things I really miss about academia. I really miss working with the students. I had some really cool research projects, not just on the Texas coast, but a lot of different places. And through that entire process, I just learned a lot. I always wanted to learn more. I never felt like I knew enough about what was happening around me. And every time I was on a boat or in the water, whatever it was, I just wanted to know, like, what's going on. It was always interesting to me. But I was still a researcher at UT, right? Then I taught oceanography and coastal ecology classes. And so, it was always learning. And then, the word sustainability didn't even really register with me that much, right? I mean, it's a relatively new concept, but my research was more, pretty hard research topics. Coastal ecology, I did things in the Florida Keys and a variety of places. But then I had an opportunity to come here to the Conservancy 4.5 years ago. A buddy of mine, Brooks Avery, my old graduate student roommate, he's a professor in chemistry. I don't know if y'all have had him, but he's old roommate and surfing buddy from way back in the day, called me and said, "Hey, Bald Head Island's hiring a new director at the Conservancy out there." And I was with my family, and we always came back here for vacation. I said, well, I'm going to come out there. I'll be there on vacation next week. I'll just go out there and talk to them. And that was in 2016. And next thing you know, I was offered the job. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that, I didn't know this kind of job really existed, right? I mean, I was in academia, and so I came back here in 2016, and I really learned way more about conservation and conservation science. I had taught marine conservation biology, but it wasn't the same concept. It was, fisheries and, kind of different principles. And so since I've been here 4.5 years, like this whole notion of what sustainability is has come way more into focus with my job now, because we talk about not just research science, but also conservation science and what it takes, what that word truly means. And what's interesting is, I was telling Maiya this. So Dylan McNamara, who's, physical oceanography chair at UNCW, is one of our board members. And, he has a big National Science Foundation project on coastal sustainability. And what, the interactions, so the hard part is there's so many different interactions, right? The science of how coastlines work, the science how coastal wetlands work, all this stuff. And then you have the human aspects, which is the economics. And the interactions between the science and the economics is gigantic, right? Because some areas have enough money and resources to try and change the way nature functions. Other places do not. Some places have, forward thinking, political systems and economic systems where they say, hey, you know what, we can be willing to wait on nature for 10 years because our infrastructure is sound. Other places cannot. And based on those short-term political and economic decisions, well, that then influences what happens to your coastline. Well, then your coastline changes, which then makes people make other decisions, political and economic decisions. Well, then they make a decision, which then changes their coastline even more, right? And so it's this constant tug of war and back and forth between the science, the nature, the politics and the economics. And over the last few years, the Conservancy, I've really gotten interested in like the big picture concept of what a sustainable coastline or system looks like and how it's supposed to function. My brain starts hurting sometimes when I think about it, because there's all these moving parts, and there's a lot of moving parts that you can't control. There's some parts that humans try and control that we probably shouldn't try and control. And the concept that we need to recognize that, coastlines are just such dynamic systems, we can't engineer them into static systems, no matter how hard we try, right? And so living with the notion that we can't control and manipulate nature is how we help sustainability, right? We can adapt and work with, but we can't control it. And not until we get to that mindset can we really truly think about what the phrase sustainability means. So I know that's a really long answer, but it took me a lot of years to get there. So I hope that was helpful.
I loved that answer. I always like hearing about like kind of the path people take to get to where they're in, because I think it's a good story for college students to hear, that it's like just because you're studying one thing doesn't mean it necessarily that you only have one path. So I like that answer.
So I will tell you too, like all my old friends from college, if you told them I was going to be a college professor someday, if you'd have told them that when I was 20, they would not have believed you. That's why if you find something you love, you have no idea, right? If you find what you're looking for and what you love, you have no idea where that's going to lead you. And that's the key, right? For people that are where y'all are, is finding something that you love. And it'll open doors that you didn't even know existed. I mean, it's hard if you're going down a path where you're just doing it to do it. That's not really a recipe for finding those really cool places to go. So, and it's, again, my buddies, when I was being a professor, like, oh my gosh, your students know about you. I'm like, I'm not telling them anything. So.
Well, thank you for giving us some background. You kind of did touch on this next question, but I guess you could maybe elaborate more if you want to. But what was it that kind of drew you the most to your current to your current position? I guess it kind of came upon you, but what about it do you really like?
So there's a couple things. I mean, one is I love our product. I love the product of the conservancy, the science that we do to understand, um, barrier islands and coastal ecosystems. I mean, I love that environment, right? So I love that we're trying to understand it. My job, I don't do a lot of science anymore, but I have staff that do the science, but I talk to them about the science, and it's just unbelievably interesting to me. So I love that we're trying to understand these systems, and I also love the education piece, right? The way we take the science that we do and what we know and how we try and, deliver that to people to help them understand coastal systems better. Because the truth is, people will protect and preserve what they know and love, right? And the more you know about these fantastic places, the more you're going to be willing to protect and preserve them, right? Because there's all these competing interests for dollars that are needed to preserve things. But if a lot of people love the coastal environment, guess what? It's got a lot better potential for being protected for the future. And so the product that the conservancy has, I just think is amazing. And it's not just the product of what we do; it's also where we do it. I mean, I love this area. I mean, I used to fish around here all the time with my grandfather when I was a little kid. And just going up and down the waterway, fishing in all the creeks, and so it's also the location. It's not just that we're learning the science and the education. It's also the location of where I get to do this. As Annie said, Bald Head's a pretty special place, right? I mean, there's not many locations where you get this kind of opportunity, and so I think it's a combination. It's just unbelievable luck, quite frankly, in my life that I have this job. And there's no way, even 4.5 years ago, before July of 2016, I didn't even know it existed. And next thing you know, it pops up, and you think about the future. And when I got into graduate school, I didn't know if they'd let me in. I had no idea what it would let me do in the future. I know this. I studied harder for the GREs than I'd ever studied for any test in my life, because I knew I just wanted to study the ocean. And when they let me in, all of a sudden it was like, okay, you're in it now. Don't mess it up. And so each step, I just appreciated every opportunity that I got after that. And I had no idea that would lead to a job like now, that all the learning that I was doing about coastlines and my love of the North Carolina coast, and all the education stuff that I did, whether it was professor outreach, even things like coaching my daughter's soccer team, right, working with kids, right, all that stuff kind of molded and meshed into experiences. And I just tried to appreciate every single one of those opportunities. So like when this came, I was ready for it, right? And so the conservancy and what we do, I was ready for it. If I wasn't ready for it, they wouldn't have hired me. Although I wasn't quite as ready for it as I thought I was, there's still a lot of learning going on. But the product here, I mean, to think that I would have missed out on this opportunity, I mean, just really, really fortunate that I just took advantage of chances when I got it. Sorry, another long answer.
A long one, but a great one. It's really inspiring to hear somebody who loves their job so much, especially, getting ready to like go into the real big world and seeing what it has to offer.
Yeah, find what you love. That makes all the difference in the world. So, when I got out of school with an undergraduate degree, working in Research Triangle Park, they were paying me a lot of money to be an engineer. And when I left to go back to graduate school in Chapel Hill, and my graduate student stipend was $800 a month, and I had to pay tuition, and I had to pay health insurance, I had to pay everything. And my friends were like, what are you doing? I'm like, man, I'm learning how the ocean works, man. You can't take that away from me. I was like, and I learned how to live, with not a lot. And, but there's no way I would have ever traded that opportunity. And like I said, thank goodness Chapel Hill let me in to graduate school.
So I guess bouncing off of your little intro to your schooling and your education, what skills that you learned in your classes have you used most in your career, specifically like your hard science background, and do you use now in your career?
Yeah, that's a really great question because so I'd say it's a combination. For my undergraduate, and I'm not trying to discount undergrad. It's just been a long time since I was in undergrad. I think the most important thing that I learned is how to think. Engineering was hard. Again, I didn't always apply myself to the best of my abilities, but it was hard and it made me how to think. And I had to learn how to learn on my own. I had some terrible professors. I couldn't understand what they were saying. They didn't care about communicating with the students. And I had to teach myself, at least teach myself enough to get through the class. We'll give it a relatively low bar. But I also learned how to think, right? I learned how to say, okay, that's important, that's not important. How do I figure this out on my own? So I think the biggest lesson, the biggest skill that I got from undergrad is just learning how to think. And when I went back to graduate school, I started taking, this is when I started taking oceanography classes. And at the time, it was, all that stuff was just an overview of the ocean. But it gave me perspective on what I was going to need to know in the future, right? And so whether it's information that you take with you, it's all small building blocks. It's not one thing here or there. It's all small building blocks that starts adding up together. It first starts out all these little dots everywhere. And then all of a sudden you get enough dots where they start growing together, and all of a sudden there's a picture that shows up. And so you can't rush it. So all the little pieces you learn from your class, some of it, it may not, there's a lot of details and facts that you hear in classes. You don't really need to remember that stuff specifically. But if you understand the context around which you're learning that, that's way more important because, especially nowadays, information is so easily accessible, right? You can look, what's that? Well, I don't know. Boop, there's the answer. But do you have the context of that? And ultimately, what you're trying to build with your classes is context for interpreting information more than memorizing information. And that's why, with the class that, Maiya and Avery took, right? I tried to get you guys to think a little bit and analyze stuff. And it wasn't about finding the exact right answer. It was more about thinking what you see in front of you and being able to analyze it at a level where you are now in your experiences, right? There's no way I'd expect undergrads, to have skills of a PhD, somebody with a PhD. That's not reasonable. But you can analyze it at a high level that makes sense for what you know and your perspective. And 10 years later, your perspective gets so much bigger, well, that your analysis will be better, right? But so I would say from undergrad, just learn how to think, learn how to analyze information. I wouldn't say be a skeptic, but I would say be skeptical too, right? When you learn things, always ask why. It's perfectly okay to ask why. And learn how to observe and pay attention to details, especially if you go into, in some kind of natural science, pay attention to what's around you. Ask why, why. So I'll just give you a stupid little anecdote. As you pull into the marina on the other side of the river, when I get off the boat every day, there's concrete walls, one on the north side and one on the south side at the entrance to the harbor. My observation is that the birds are always on one side of that concrete. They're always on the north side. They're never on the south side. That's just like my brain works that way. I know it's weird, but I'm observing, right? I'm paying attention. And so I'm like, why? Why are all the birds over there? They're never on the other side. There'll be 50 birds and they're all on one side of the channel and never on the other side, right? That kind of, you build into that observation stuff. And so learning how to observe and the skills with that, and ask why and be curious. I think those are the most useful things more than any particular individual class that I ever took.
Awesome. So this next question, you definitely have been kind of talking about all throughout. But if you want to answer it more specifically, you've touched on how you've kind of learned about analyzing and finding the ways that you learn best, but what are some skills that you've found like specifically in your position now that you have, that you just kind of like maybe never even thought about or were just totally new to you?
Yeah, so I would say skills are, well, people skills are really valuable. They don't teach you that in school. Learning how to work as part of a team, unbelievably important. And learning how to listen to other people. Not always easy, but always valuable. Respectful discourse. You don't always have to agree with somebody you work with, but you should always be able to have a conversation with them where you're not pointing fingers at each other. Even if they point fingers at you, don't point back. Right? That doesn't help. So I think the people skills and the teamwork skills, you'll get a little bit of that in class with group projects, which I'm a big believer in. But to be successful in life, there's nobody out there that's wildly successful that did it by themselves. Just doesn't happen. I mean, there's some that are maybe a little more independent, but everybody needs to work as part of a team. And it's amazing what other people know that you don't. No matter how old you get, how many years you've been doing something, you got, staff that are 25 years younger, 30 years younger. I'm like, wow, write that down. I mean, it's really cool, right? And to constantly learn. And so, being part of a team and still loving to learn are skills. You don't learn that in class, right? And that's just, and that's unbelievably valuable when you get out in the professional world is to learn how to be a really good teammate. That will take you a long way.
So many good pieces of advice coming from this conversation. I took a class with you and I feel like I still am learning more.
So Maiya, it's a lot of mistakes that I've made that I'm trying to give you guys some heads up. I mean, a lot of these lessons are hard lessons, right? And so I didn't invent these ideas. It's like, oh, that was a bad idea. All right, let's make note of that. Don't do that again. So
that perfectly leads into our next question of what do you wish somebody told you when you were getting into your field or just entering your career?
To me, it's okay to fail, right? You're never really pushing the envelope and bounds if you're not willing to fail. You can't ever be afraid to fail. That the worst thing that somebody can tell you is to be afraid to fail. The people that ultimately are the most successful in life are the ones that fail the most and just realize how to get up every single time. And I used to have this poster when I was a kid. This guy, Ace Cool was his name. It's an old surfer from Hawaii. He was on like a 35, 40-foot wave. And it said, success is getting up just one more time than you fall. I'm like, it's like, that's it, right? I mean, you just get up and take that advice and learn from it, right? And don't be afraid to fail. You can't be afraid to fail. If you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough, right? And you got to be willing to step outside of your comfort zone. Obviously there's limits. You don't want to step over a line. It's gonna severe physical harm, right? But don't be afraid to fail and try new things and if it doesn't work, that's okay, right? It's nothing. You're only failing if you don't learn from something that didn't work. Right? If it didn't work, write it down, make a note, and say, yeah, okay, there you go. What did I learn from that? Move on. I mean, it's really a failure if you have a wall in front of you. Not that you run into it once or twice, that you run into it 10 or 12 times and never try and go around that wall. Right? I mean, that's failure. So don't be afraid.
Like Maiya said, very awesome advice that we're getting today. Much spanning further than just career-wise. So thank you.
Sure.
This is a question that I'm personally very interested in because I've actually been doing some research on y'all's website about this. But how can we students and anybody else who's on the call get involved? What volunteer or internship or even job opportunities do y'all have, or workshops or anything along those lines?
Yeah, so a couple of ways. So we do have internships. We have summer internships, which people are here roughly three months, give or take. We usually have about 18. With COVID last year, we could only have 4, but we usually have 18, and they do. They work with some of them work with our sea turtle program. Some of them work on our research projects related to the marsh and the forest and that sort of thing. Some of them work with our education program, working with the public. And we also have, retail and marketing type internships as well. Then we also offer 10-month internships, which are, for people that have already graduated that start in August and go through the following June. And they do a variety of things, get education internships, as well as research science, conservation science type internships. Those are for, students that have already graduated, but the ones in the summer, half of them are, still in school and the other half just recently graduated. So those are great opportunities for internships. We also do, have volunteer opportunities. We have a series of beach cleanups and that sort of thing that we have throughout the year. We have some citizen science projects. I mean, the truth is, if y'all are interested in working with, my science team, just let me know. I mean, we'll figure out a way to get you over here and help out where we need. We do have, some students that come help us throughout the year doing other things. So we have, a lot of formal and informal opportunities. And there's other ways that, it's just with COVID right now, it's just really hard, in terms of informal things. We do outreach off the island occasionally, and we used to do more of it than we do now, but there may be education opportunities off the island with staff too. So